In this short grammar video, we're going to look at the function of modals of advisability, specifically with should and ought to and had better. So here we can see that in the first note that the modals should and ought to are used to give advice. So Derek should answer that email. You ought to send Maya a copy too. Should is more common in conversational English, in American conversational English, than ought to. And should can be used in both formal and informal writing. Sometimes American speakers of English will soften their advice to make it less demanding with one of these adverbs, maybe, perhaps, or the phrase, I think. Ryan, maybe you should spend less time on the internet, to soften that advice. Had better, again, is not in our book, but here's a section on had better, and I'm going to skip this in this video, but you can pause the video and read this section. For negative statements, you can use should not and had better to give negative statements, or maybe more of advice or warning. So the negative of should is should not, and the contraction is shouldn't. We'll talk about pronunciation in another video. You shouldn't post right away. The negative of had better is had better not. You had better, or contraction, you'd better not use your real name. Be careful not to say you'd not better, okay? And just a quick usage note, we do not usually use the negative of ought to in American English. We don't say ought not to or oughtn't very often. That's more of a British English thing. For questions, we again, we use the should, and we don't usually use ought to or had better for questions. So when should I sign on is really how we ask questions with modals of advice. You're asking someone for their advice about that. Or should I join that chat room? Notice in the usage note that you can use should in short answers, but we often use other expressions. Obviously, you can say, yes, you should, it's fun. Or you might say, sure, why not? Or not really, it's a waste of time, to the question, should I join the chat room?